Welcome to our YouTube channel, The Alien Tales, and please ensure that you have subscribed.
If love is universal, why does ours feel like a cosmic accident? We're statistical impossibilities. Two beings from different realities finding each other in infinite space. Yet here we are, defying mathematics. Nebula Hartwell pressed her temples as the cosmic probability calculator beeped its 1000th error message of the day. Her cramped quarters aboard the research vessel Serendipity smelled perpetually of burnt circuits and the synthetic lavender air freshener that never quite masked the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. Computer, run diagnostic on probability matrix 77 alpha, she muttered, fingers dancing across holographic displays that flickered with equations most beings couldn't comprehend. The AI's voice chirped cheerfully, "Diagnostic complete. Everything's functioning perfectly, Dr. Hartwell. The universe is just being mathematically ridiculous today." Nebula snorted. She'd spent 3 years calculating the probability of finding intelligent life in parallel dimensions, and today's reading suggested something was about to happen that had roughly the same odds as a supernova deciding to become a disco ball. Her coffee mug, a ceramic monstrosity emblazoned with Galaxy's okayest scientist, vibrated against the desk as an interdimensional rift tore open 6 feet from her face. Purple light spilled across her cluttered workspace, illuminating scattered papers covered in equations that would make Einstein weep with joy or terror. A figure tumbled through the tear in reality, landing in an undignified heap among her collection of vintage Earth novels. He groaned, rubbing his head, and looked up with eyes the color of distant nebulae. "Well," he said in an accent she couldn't place, brushing interdimensional dust from his jacket. "This is either the worst travel agency in the multiverse, or I've just had the most statistically improbable Tuesday of my existence." Nebula stared, her probability calculator now displaying numbers that defied every law of physics she knew. Caspian flux had been dimension hopping for approximately 700 years. Give or take a decade, time got fuzzy when you regularly violated the laws of linear causality. But he'd never materialized in someone's personal workspace before, especially not while they were wearing pajamas covered in tiny rockets. "I'm terribly sorry," he said, attempting to untangle himself from what appeared to be a pile of books titled things like Pride and Prejudice and Photon Torpedoes. "The dimensional compass has been acting up since I accidentally flew through a temporal storm last Tuesday. Or was it next Thursday? Time travel makes verb tenses unnecessarily complicated." The woman staring at him had wild auburn hair that looked like she'd been electrocuted by her own genius, and her eyes held the particular brand of exhaustion that came from trying to understand the universe's sense of humor. "You're not supposed to exist," she said flatly, pointing at a display showing probability calculations. "According to my readings, the chances of an interdimensional being materializing in my lab are approximately 0.000001%. Yes, I imagine so," Caspian finished, brushing off his coat. "But then again, I've never put much stock in mathematics. Reality has a tendency to ignore the rules when it's feeling particularly whimsical." She blinked. "You just calculated those odds in your head?" "Well, yes. Occupational hazard of being a professional impossible person." He grinned, and she noticed his smile was slightly lopsided in a way that shouldn't have been charming but absolutely was. "I'm Caspian Flux, purveyor of statistical anomalies and accidentally charming interdimensional incidents. And you are apparently the person the universe has chosen to make my day significantly more interesting." Nebula's calculator exploded in a shower of sparks behind her. "So let me understand this correctly," Nebula said, frantically waving a fire extinguisher at her smoking equipment while Caspian sat cross-legged on her floor, seemingly unbothered by the chaos. "You're telling me you've been accidentally falling through dimensions for 7 centuries, and you've never once considered that this might be a problem?" Caspian shrugged, examining one of her burnt probability matrices with the casual interest of someone perusing a particularly unremarkable menu. "I prefer to think of it as aggressively embracing serendipity. Besides, it's led to some wonderfully unexpected encounters. I once had tea with a civilization of sentient geometric shapes. Lovely beings, terrible conversationalists. Everything they said was completely pointless." Despite herself, Nebula snorted with laughter. "That's possibly the worst pun I've ever heard. I've had 700 years to practice. Would you like to hear my material about parallel lines? It's truly awful. She was about to respond when her emergency coffee maker, the one piece of equipment she'd insisted on duplicating in case of exactly this sort of crisis, began making concerning gurgling sounds. "No," she whispered, watching in horror as her last hope for caffeine began to smoke. "Not the coffee machine. Anything but the coffee machine." Caspian glanced between her panicked expression and the dying appliance. "I take it this is significant? I haven't slept in 36 hours. Without coffee, I become unpredictable." "How unpredictable?" She fixed him with a stare that could have powered her ship's engines. "Last time I ran out of coffee, I accidentally proved that the universe's expansion rate was actually just cosmic procrastination." The coffee machine gave one final, dramatic wheeze and died. Somewhere in the distance, Caspian swore he could hear the universe chuckling. "Emergency rations it is, then," Caspian announced, producing what appeared to be a small silver cube from his coat pocket. He tossed it onto Nebula's desk, where it immediately began transforming into something that smelled remarkably like pancakes. Nebula stared. "Is that interdimensional breakfast?" "Temporal pancakes, actually. They exist in 17 different time periods simultaneously, which makes them rather filling. The syrup is from a universe where maple trees achieved sentience and started their own breakfast corporation." She accepted a plate that had materialized from nowhere, noting absently that the pancakes seemed to shimmer slightly. "This is either the most elaborate hallucination I've ever had, or my life just became significantly more complicated. In my experience, those things aren't mutually exclusive." Caspian settled beside her, and she caught a scent like starlight and possibility. "Though I must say your reality is particularly cozy. Most dimensions I visit are either trying to kill me or trying to sell me timeshare properties in pocket universes. You're taking this remarkably well for someone whose life just got turned upside down by a mathematical impossibility." He paused mid-bite. "You know, I've been drifting through dimensions for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to sit still with someone who didn't immediately try to dissect me for science." "The day is young," Nebula deadpanned. Caspian laughed, a sound like distant thunder that made something in her chest flutter in ways that definitely weren't covered in her physics textbooks. "Tell me," he said, his voice suddenly more serious, "what were you calculating before I so rudely tumbled into your life? Those equations looked rather intense." Nebula's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The weight of her research suddenly felt heavier than the ship's gravitational generator. "I've been trying to calculate the probability of finding love in an infinite universe," Nebula admitted, her cheeks flushing the color of a Martian sunset. "Which sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud." Caspian set down his fork. "That's actually brilliant, and potentially world-ending depending on the answer. According to my calculations, the odds of two compatible beings finding each other in infinite space should be essentially zero. The universe is too vast, the variables too numerous. And yet," she gestured vaguely at the space around them, "people fall in love every day. Somehow. And you wanted to know why. I wanted to know if love is truly universal, or if we're all just cosmic accidents stumbling around in the dark, occasionally bumping into each other." Caspian was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing something she hadn't meant to reveal. "What if," he said slowly, "the universe isn't as random as we think? What if there are patterns we simply haven't recognized yet? That's what I'm afraid of." "Afraid?" Nebula stood abruptly, pacing to the small viewport that showed the swirling colors of hyperspace. "If love is mathematically predictable, then it's not really love, is it? It's just chemistry, biology, probability. But if it's truly random," she turned back to him, "then how do we trust it?" Caspian rose and moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Maybe," he said softly, "the question isn't whether love is random or predetermined. Maybe the question is whether it matters." Through the viewport, a star exploded in the distance, painting the cosmic void in impossible colors. "There's something I haven't told you," Caspian said, his reflection ghost-like in the viewport beside hers. "About why I keep falling through dimensions." Nebula turned to study his profile, noting the way starlight caught in his dark hair. "Let me guess. You're cursed by an interdimensional witch? Allergic to staying in one reality? Running from cosmic debt collectors? Nothing so dramatic." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for someone." The words hit her chest like a meteor. "Oh, not romantically," he added quickly, catching her expression. "At least I don't think so. I've been having dreams about someone for the past 50 years. Dreams that feel more like memories. Someone who's calculating the mathematics of love in a small ship somewhere in the void." Nebula's breath caught. "Caspian, I know how it sounds, but I've learned to trust the universe's sense of humor, and lately, it's been practically cackling." He turned to face her fully. "What if this isn't an accident? What if my dimensional compass didn't malfunction? What if it brought me exactly where I needed to be?" She wanted to argue, to point out all the logical fallacies in what he was suggesting. Instead, she found herself remembering the dreams she'd been having, dreams of falling through purple light into someone's arms. "That's impossible," she whispered. "So is this conversation. So is breakfast that exists in 17 time periods. So is a probability engineer and a dimensional wanderer sitting in a spaceship discussing the mathematics of destiny." He reached out, his fingers barely brushing hers. "Impossible seems to be our specialty." The ship's computer chose that moment to announce, "Dr. Hartwell, we're approaching the nexus point. Shall I begin deceleration protocols?" Nebula's eyes widened. The nexus point, where 17 different dimensions intersected, where her research had indicated the highest probability of dimensional anomalies. "You planned this?" Caspian said, not accusingly but with a kind of awed admiration as the serendipity dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, reality itself seemed to be having an existential crisis. Streams of different dimensions bleeding into each other like watercolors in the rain. "I needed to gather data," Nebula replied, her hands dancing over the controls. "The nexus point is where dimensional barriers are thinnest. If love truly is universal, if there are patterns that transcend individual realities, they'd be visible here," he finished. "Nebula, you magnificent, terrifying genius. Do you realize what you've discovered?" She pulled up her readings, and they both stared at the display. Instead of the chaotic randomness she'd expected, the data showed patterns, beautiful, complex, but undeniably organized structures connecting different dimensions. "It's like cosmic sheet music," she breathed. "The universe is singing," Caspian said wonderingly, "and love is the melody." But as they watched, the patterns began to shift, becoming more agitated. The ship shuddered. "Something's wrong," Nebula said, her fingers flying over the controls. "The dimensional barriers are destabilizing. If they collapse, 17 realities crash into each other?" Caspian finished grimly. "That's not going to end well for anyone involved." Through the viewport, they could see other ships, vessels from different dimensions, all caught in the same gravitational nightmare. A crystalline ship that looked like it was made of frozen music. A vessel that appeared to be constructed entirely of living wood. A craft that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. The other researchers, Nebula realized. They're all here. Everyone who's been studying love across the multiverse. Caspian grabbed her hand. "Then we're not the only statistical impossibility. We're part of something bigger." The ship's alarms began blaring as reality itself started to come apart at the seams. "I can stabilize the barriers," Nebula shouted over the alarms. "But I need to solve the love equation first, the pattern that connects all dimensions. It's the key." Caspian, who had somehow managed to remain upright despite the ship spinning through 17 different gravitational fields, began pulling books from her scattered collection. "What do you need?" "Mathematics, poetry, philosophy, anything that tries to explain what love is." She was already scribbling equations on every available surface, her mind racing through calculations that would have made her former professors either weep with pride or have her committed. "Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds," Caspian quoted, tossing her a book of Shakespeare sonnets. "Too constant," she called back, writing furiously. "Love changes, adapts, grows. Love is a temporary madness," he tried from another book. "Too temporary," It persists across dimensions. The ship lurched violently, and through the viewport, they could see one of the crystalline vessels beginning to phase in and out of existence. Love is the bridge between two hearts, Caspian said desperately. Nebula paused, her stylus halfway to the wall. That's actually it. Not a destination, but a connection. Not a thing, but a relationship between things. Her equations suddenly clicked into place, revealing a pattern so elegant it made her gasp. Love wasn't random and it wasn't predetermined, it was relational. It existed in the spaces between beings, in the choice to reach across the void toward another consciousness. The universe isn't singing a song, she realized. It's creating harmony, and harmony requires multiple voices choosing to blend together. She input the final calculations, and suddenly the chaos outside began to organize itself into something that looked suspiciously like a dance. The dimensional barriers stabilized with a sound like cosmic wind chimes, and suddenly the serendipity was floating peacefully in a space that shouldn't have existed. A pocket of calm at the intersection of 17 realities. Did we just solve love? Caspian asked, staring at Nebula's equations that now covered every surface of her quarters. We proved it, she corrected, her voice filled with wonder. Love isn't universal because it's predetermined, and it's not meaningless because it's random. It's universal because consciousness naturally tends toward connection, toward harmony. But it requires choice, requires risk, requires two beings deciding to reach toward each other across the impossible distance. Through the viewport, the other ships were moving in perfect formation now, their different technologies and designs creating a pattern that was somehow more beautiful than any single vessel could have achieved alone. So we're not statistical impossibilities, Caspian said softly. We're statistical inevitabilities. Given infinite time and space, consciousness will always find consciousness. But the specific connections, who finds whom, when, how, that's where the magic lives. She turned to face him, suddenly aware that they were standing very close, that his eyes held flecks of starlight, that the space between them hummed with the same energy that held dimensions together. Caspian, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I think I'm falling in love with you, and I can't calculate the probability of that happening because love exists in the spaces between calculations. He smiled, the lopsided grin that had been making her heart do impossible things since he'd tumbled through her dimensional rift. Good, he said, because I've been falling toward you through 17 different realities, and I was starting to worry about the landing. 6 months later, Nebula's research had revolutionized interdimensional relationships theory, earned her 3 prestigious awards, and gotten her invited to give lectures at universities that existed in dimensions she'd never heard of. But more importantly, it had given her the mathematical framework to understand why Caspian never seemed to stay in the same dimension for more than a few weeks at a time. It's not that I'm cursed or running from something, he explained over breakfast. Actual Earth coffee this time, imported at considerable expense from a dimension where the beans had evolved to be naturally caffeinated. It's that I'm quantum entangled with you. When you move through space, I'm pulled along through the dimensional barriers. We're cosmically synchronized. That's ridiculous, Nebula said, then paused. Also incredibly romantic. Also probably scientifically accurate. She pulled up her latest calculations. Look at this, our dimensional signatures are harmonically linked. When I travel to a new research station, you instinctively jump to the dimension where that station exists. So we're stuck with each other? We're choosing to be stuck with each other. That's what makes it love instead of just physics. Caspian leaned across the table and kissed her, soft and sweet and tasting like infinite possibility. I can live with that kind of statistical inevitability. Good, she said against his lips, because according to my latest calculations, the probability of us finding anyone else who could put up with this level of cosmic weirdness is approximately 0. And yet, he said, pulling back to grin at her. Here we are, defying mathematics, outside their new ship, larger than the Serendipity, with better coffee facilities and a reinforced laboratory designed to withstand the occasional dimensional incident. The stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small miracle of 2 impossible people choosing each other across the vast, beautiful, ridiculous universe. In the end, love wasn't universal because it was written in the stars. Love was universal because beings like them kept writing it there, one choice at a time, one impossible connection at a time, one statistical anomaly that turned out to be the most natural thing in the world.